Good afternoon and welcome back to day 3 of Real Estate Live UK. For those of you joining us as your first session this week, Real Estate Live is a week of free virtual events designed to keep the property and regeneration sectors talking and is being delivered by White Label and our partners. Our first session this afternoon is being delivered by Capital West London, the West London Alliance's inward investment programme representing the combined West London local authorities, and is being sponsored by Yoo Capital, who are currently leading the stunning redevelopment of Olympia. In all our sessions this week, we're looking for as much audience participation as possible, and to kickstart your engagement in this session, we're opening with a poll considering what will be the most important factor in kickstarting development and recovering the strength of UK real estate. So that question should have just popped up on all your screens, and we'll give you a few seconds to complete your answers. We'll be continuing the participation in the session by asking for further audience engagement via the Q&A. You will see the question and answer feature in your toolbar, and we encourage you to put as many questions as you like to the panel. We've got an hour for this session, so lots of time to answer anything you might be wondering about the creative industries in West London. We've got fantastic speakers joining us this afternoon to consider the significance of the creative sector and the potential for its continued growth in the sub-region. And I will now hand over to Joe Gumb, Director at White Label, who will be chairing the session this afternoon. Joe.
Hi. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to all our panellists and also to our attendees, because I can see quite a lot of you have now managed to register to come in and listen to today's webinar. It's great to have so many people here. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to talk to each of our panellists in turn to give them an opportunity to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that we're currently looking at post-COVID-19. And then we're going to go to a Q&A. I am going to ask that if you would like to make a question, I know we're all terribly used to doing chats on Zoom webinars, but if you would mind using the question and answer feature, it's much easier for the rest of us. So if you could use the Q&A feature rather than the chat, it would be extremely helpful. You can also wave a hand at me and I can bring you in live to ask a question to your panel. The big advantage of using the Q&A feature, which is if you think of a question while we're talking or early, you can get it typed in now and it'll be ready to go once we get to the Q&A section of today's webinar. Right, talking to each of our panelists in turn, I'm first going to turn to Lloyd. So of all the people we have here, Lloyd, there is a massive investment by you in Olympia and in the cultural future of this area. So what's happening with it?
So I think just to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page, let me make a few kind of opening remarks about Olympia for those who may not be completely familiar with it. Olympia is the original Olympia Exhibition Center built in 1886. It is in Hammersmith and Fulham. It is along the Olympia line and railway. The site is actually 14 acres, and it was built originally as an exhibition hall by the Victorians in order to take the best of British innovation and literally bring it to the world. And that business has been in continuous operations as an exhibition hall since 1886. And today, as the new owners of Olympia, Yoo Capital and our partners in Germany, Deutsche Finance, BVK and BKB, have embarked upon a 1.3 billion sterling investment into Olympia to transform it into a new form of exhibition hall, which is surrounded by live entertainment, creative industries, incubator offices, and open planned streetscapes and open squares to enable the public to come and enjoy Olympia without actually having to buy a ticket. And that was one of the big pieces of our vision, was to make sure that Olympia stayed true to its original ethos, which is we are open to everyone. And in making this commitment, it is effectively expanding Olympia from its current footprint today of about 1 million square foot to more than doubling that over the next 4 years. So to fast forward to what we're doing in the current market environment, we have some very positive news. Number one is that we are continuing to make that £1.3 billion investment as we speak. That actually means that we have 85 firms actively working and progressing on detailed design, specifications, and legals. with 8 of the biggest names in live entertainment, hospitality, food. We're also now starting to talk to occupiers in the creative industries about relocating their offices into Olympia. And as a result, we actually remain very much on program. The second thing to state, which Andrew, one of the senior partners of the firm, will come to in a second, is the fact that working very, very closely with central government and local government, we are continuing to progress the physical advancement of bringing this master plan to life. That means we've been working very, very carefully in regard to construction and enabling works that began in January and have continued throughout this period. And we've got some good progress there, which we can speak to in a second. And then thirdly, I think that in making the first 2 statements, which is we're investing and we're carrying on, and 2, we're actually on site and on program, it has enabled us to engage with the wider market in a way that might surprise some people, where when you think about businesses of any kind of size or nature, despite the current moment, which creates a bit of a pause for everyone, and sadly for a lot of companies, a flight to survival as opposed to growth, there are still a number of businesses who have the ability to focus on both surviving and on future growth because they're in that financial position. And with those groups, seeing us continue on, seeing us continue to make a 1.3 billion investment has actually focused them on us in a way we had not anticipated so early in the program of delivery, whereby we're now speaking to some of the larger names in the creative industries about moving hundreds of thousands of square feet of new demand into Olympia to complement the live entertainment theaters, the restaurants, and a lot of the other spaces that we are building. And that for us is quite telling in terms of the collective commitment we believe, even in today's market, you can deliver if you get the right partners involved in that delivery program who are equally committed to see us all the way through the end of this pandemic.
Sorry, Andrew, is there anything you'd like to add to that in the sense of what we're looking at here is how Olympia is obviously going to be able to hopefully kickstart some of the greater createch and creative industries around the area?
Sorry, Joe. I mean, I was more talking about the real estate and the
advancement
of development. Essentially, just going on from what Lloyd has said, is the 85 firms that we've got committed to Olympia in terms of the design. What we're looking at the moment is taking the opportunity to advance the development of the works. As people will know, we're actually working with Laing O'Rourke, who are basically the leaders in DFMA, Design for Manufacturing and Assembly, off-site production. If anyone sees the Sunday Times last weekend, they would have seen an advert from Laing O'Rourke, and they assure the values of 70, 30, 60, which is 70% off-site fabrication and 70% quality control, 30% reduction in program time, and 60% improvement in quality. So we've been looking at those aspects to it. We're on site at the moment. We've got about 80 to 100 personnel from Laing O'Rourke on site doing enabling works. The site is 10 acres that we're visiting on at the moment, so we're fully compliant with the COVID requirements and guidelines from the government, which were issued on the 11th of May. We're looking at, because the shows are not happening in the various halls, which are grade 2 and grade 2 style listed, it affords us the opportunity to look at advancing the works. And what we've been spending basically 24/7 since January, advancing the design of the works in conjunction with our tenants to actually incorporate their agreement for leases and their requirements into the main works, to look at where we could actually accelerate the program. And so really what we're looking at is getting onto site quicker, looking to actually produce a development which reduces the overall program by at least 6 months. We may be able to reduce it by 9 months, which would be a real win, because we're coming out from the other side with a fully fledged development in sort of 2023 as opposed to 2024.
That's great. Actually, we've actually already had somebody ask the question whether it's caused you to pause, but it seems to me that actually COVID has provided the opportunity to speed it up. I'm guessing if you're working mostly with off-site and then bringing it in, that would have been quite quick anyway, but now you've got the opportunity to be even faster.
Yeah, we've taken this opportunity because a lot of the development was structuring around threading the works through the occupational business as it was going with all the shows. What we're doing at the moment is taking all that intervention works, which would have happened years 2021 and 2022, and bring that into this year. And that means we have to accelerate the design. It's a slight headache in terms of doing things slightly out of sequence on the design side, but it gives us the ability to actually get most of that work out of the way. What's also interesting is that we can actually look at the design when we talk about offices in terms of looking at post-COVID, in terms of what tenants are looking for offices. And we already see that a lot of them are looking at an improved environment. They want increased air filtration rates. They want to know in terms of accessibility, lift requirements, and then also desks arrangements. How do they fit in the new modern environment? Because although a lot of people say, well, there may be a reduction in offices, but the actual spacing around people means that the more space take within the offices. So you've got to make them more efficient. Hot desking will probably change in the sense of people will just have portable technology which they will bring to a desk. So there's no physical element that's left on a desk in terms of COVID related aspects to it. So it's things like telephony, bringing your phone in, and then that automatically becomes a phone that is brought into the main switchboard phones. Things like that we have the opportunity, because we're still on the drawing board stage, to actually incorporate in the design and get that put into production for the delivery of the scheme.
Thanks, that's great. I'm going to go over to Louise now, because what was kind of interesting about that is, although we think a lot about the challenges and perhaps we aren't getting some of the shows on the dates we might have originally wanted to start seeing them, creativity is obviously providing a little bit of a boost in the longer term, hopefully, for London as a whole. Louise, what role can creativity play in helping to reboot our economy?
So if I give the context of, thank you very much. If I give the context of who I work for and what we do, and then how we look at creativity as a whole. So I'm the head of creative at London & Partners. Many of you might not know who we are. We are the International Trade, Investment and Promotion Agency for London. So that means we support overseas businesses to set up in London. And we in fact have 2 business support programs that help London-based businesses grow and scale from London. So both those programs are free to join. One is for companies of 3 or more, and one is for companies who are looking to internationalize. I think what's also relevant for this conversation in particular is that we're also the tourism office, and we're the convention bureau for London. So we have been grappling with the fact that we are the convention bureau and what that means for London. And finally, we're also the company that promotes the higher education sector in London to overseas students. So it's all about promoting London, and we do that for all sectors, to all markets, although creative industries for me is obviously one of the focuses that I have, because I lead the development of a company-wide strategy for the creative industries. And within the creative industries, and this is to your point, Joe, we cover all the subsectors, but we have a particular focus on e-commerce and retail technology, on video games and esports, on immersive technologies, which includes augmented and virtual realities. And in fact, these are sectors, so we're measuring what's obviously happening globally. We have 5 core markets, and we're measuring what's happening there. And those sectors are performing, they've been performing really well during the global pandemic. Which, there are other sectors that we know have been really struggling. But within the creative industries, I think there is, you don't want to say there is an opportunity, but they are going to possibly go into recovery faster. I mean, the UK creative industries generates more than £100 billion a year. It employs 2 million people. And for London, the creative industries are just a massive opportunities. It's really where I think a lot of what Lloyd and Andrew were just saying, this is where tech and creative meet. And there's new and disruptive companies that then grow and scale. And because the UK is an early adopter of technologies, it's a huge market when companies are looking to expand globally, and that London is one of those places they come to. I mean, of all the foreign direct investment, 50% comes to London. And then talking about creative companies, so we look at it from that lens. Some of the companies that have set up in West London from overseas that I'm thinking people will have heard of would include Net-a-Porter, who opened their technology hub in White City Place, so near Westfield. And then, of course, there's a significant number of overseas businesses in Chiswick Park, so big companies like Pokemon, Discovery and Sega, all of whom we work with. And it's I mean, I have to say, for London and Partners, it is always exciting when there are new developments happening, like the one at Olympia, because it adds to the London mix. It really helps create, buzz and excitement, and it helps us showcase London. West London has traditionally had a very strong creative focus, including the film and television sector. But I don't want to go on about that because I know sort of Bill is planning to talk about that. But for us, I think the creative industries, it's a showcase. It's a London showcase. And I think for West London, there's this massive opportunity.
Thanks very much. I think it's kind of interesting that you obviously will get different balances and different rolling emergences from the pandemic. I think I did read somewhere that I think like 40% of the gaming industry is in London and just the surrounding area. You just think what a massive contributor to the economy that is. I'm going to move on to Shama because it might be thought that Brent could have missed out on what should have been a golden economic opportunity this year, because you were going to be the borough of, well, you're still the borough of culture. You may not have been able to make as much of it as you would have hoped.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to share a screen and I'll talk a bit more about that borough of culture and what we're doing as a result of that. So hopefully the technology will work.
Looking good, Shama.
There we go. Is that working? Brilliant. So Brent has been designated the Borough of Culture for 2020, and obviously with COVID, a lot of the planned events aren't taking place, but we've had rescheduling for next year. And for those of you that don't know Brent that well, in the south of the borough, we have Kilburn all the way up to the north in Kenton, which we border Harrow. So we've got a really disparate and wide, kind of very mixed, very diverse borough, over 150 languages spoken in Brent. So it kind of gives you the scale of what kind of cultural diversity there is within in Brent. And obviously, we're also the home of Wembley Stadium and kind of national stadium there. In answer to the question about what role does the creative sector play in the borough's regeneration, we've taken the Borough of Culture as a way of looking at a legacy and how we create a legacy beyond the Borough of Culture. So we're looking at our Brent's focus is around supporting artists in the small incubation space through affordable workspace strategies, but through meanwhile uses, how we repurpose high streets and how we create a creative sector around our high streets. Looking at inclusive growth, because one of the things that we are very wary of and anticipating because of COVID is employment, and actually how can the creative sector meet those needs, and also using some of our planning levers, so the community infrastructure levy, and particularly neighbourhood section, how can that support the creative sector and regeneration as wider on in Brent's focus. So some of the things that we've done through our affordable workspace strategy and kind of building on from that is creating creative sectors. Two of our most successful at the moment are in Wembley and Alperton, where we have a housing zone, and we secured through Section 106 affordable workspace. So the workspace that's now in sort of affordable artist space is now rented at 50% of market rent. The one in Alperton is actually on a 150-year lease for affordable workspace with Artist Studio Company. And there is a priority for Brent residents in those schemes, and we now actually have those schemes have waiting lists. So that's been a really success, and we're looking to kind of expand that across the borough, particularly in our growth areas and where we look at affordable workspace. It's one of our artists who's based at Alperton. And so one of the things that we do is one studio is offered for free every year to a Brent resident, and it looks at kind of engaging creativity and affordable workspace and entrepreneurship. One of the things that we have been working on over the last couple of years is our inclusive growth strategy, and we had a real focus within that on the arts and culture sector and the creative economy. We do feel that it is one of the fastest growing sectors, and it's resilient not just to to other industries, but actually its connection and resilience to automation. And we really think there's a real strength about how the creative industries could look at supporting employment through those areas. We also think there's an opportunity here for redesignating and repurposing our high streets. We have, particularly in Willesden, some really small creative startups based on our high street, which helps animate our high street and hopefully kind of challenge the decline of high streets within our borough. And we're looking to kind of make sure that there's more inclusive element to it. And Brent has a long history of cultural and civic and creative history. So within Kilburn, we also have a real musical history. We're the home of reggae, British reggae. So trying to build on that. The Notting Hill Carnival actually kind of crosses part of our borough, and the main business that supports the costumes at Notting Hill is based in Harleston. So we're looking at trying how we build that kind of historical culture and historical creative industries and bringing it to sort of modern audiences. And we're incorporating that also within some of our key regeneration schemes. So South Kilburn is a council-led estate regeneration scheme. We have a sort of enterprise hub based at the Castle Granville Centre, and using neighbourhood SIL monies, we're able to refurbish where we've got businesses from all sectors of the creative industries based at the Granville, as well as other sort of type of businesses. And we've commissioned artworks and children, young people creating videos and stuff about the regeneration of South Kilburn. So it's bringing art and the communities together in a way that perhaps we can support more. And finally, particularly that's linked to our neighbourhood, Borough of Culture, is our Seen and Heard project, which our operational director for regeneration is leading on. And it's about connecting young people and development and regeneration. And one of the things that we found through the Borough of Culture work is that young people feel very excluded from the whole development process and the conversations they have about the changes to their environment. So one of the things that Borough of Culture is really keen on is how we amplify young people's voices, and through the work that we do at Regeneration is to look at how their voice can be amplified through the Seen and Heard project. And this initial thing that we're doing with Quintain, our partners in Wembley Park, is they're going to be delivering an outdoor space, a park, with young people as the sort of starter point for Seen and Heard. But conversations that I now have with developers and regeneration schemes is actually, how are you talking to young people about their needs and about open spaces and culture within your development? And that's something that we're looking to build on. And I think finally, I'd just like to point out that with local government, we're really keen in Brent as well to look at how we meet the challenges that are going to be posed to us because of COVID. And unemployment is going to be a huge, huge thing for us. We're already seeing some really stark numbers coming through from the West London Alliance about what that could mean. And the majority of our businesses in Brent are actually SME. So I think our role in regeneration and with meeting some of the challenges around employment, about SMEs, also climate change in the green sector, is how we can marry all of that together to make it beneficial for our residents. And I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions later on.
Thank you very much. Bill, I think you might like to follow on very nicely from what we were talking earlier about the value of our creative areas. Sorry, I just need to unmute you. I've realised you're still muted. Can you unmute? Thank you.
Yes, I figured out the button. Apologies. Yes, my name is Bill, and I would like to talk about the creative industries. I work for the Creative Enterprise Zone in West London, and a lot of things that have been said, I think we tie into. As Shama said, one of the important things we're trying to do is support our creative industries, but ensure that there's a legacy that's being left. And in our case, for people who don't know, the Creative Enterprise Zone was a program created by the mayor in 2019, and similar to the Borough of Culture program, it was awarded to different boroughs to find a way to identify and support their creative industries. We were one of 6, and Croydon, for example, is focusing on music and the nighttime economy. Tottenham is focusing on fashion. And we want to have a focus on TV and film and the digital and IT sector. Within our creative enterprise zone of our creative industries, 70% work in that sector. And that's a combination of having a lot of small micros and enterprises, along with some of the major corporates that Louise alluded to in terms of Sky. We've got Paramount Pictures, United International, Chinese Global Television Network, and a few others. So it's an infrastructure to build on. We've even got the Gillette building, which has got temporary filming, which has filmed everything from 24 to a Mark Wahlberg movie last year. So for us, it's how do we, as Shama said, how do you tap into the strengths that you have? And for us, we've been affected by COVID-19, as Shama said, with a lot of the business losses. And for us, for the creatives, that's really been a loss of working space and co-working space. So one is trying to figure out how that's going to work in a new world. But I think for the opportunities for digital and IT and TV and film, there are plenty of opportunities for growth. And for us, it's about connecting to the larger sub-regional infrastructure. So we are working with Film London and London and Partners and West London Alliance and Screen Skills and others on how do we make sure that we get employment and skills there, and working with our FE and HE providers. Because again, as an industry, we're told that coming back, TV and film is going to have a pent-up demand, and trying to get ready to, tap into those opportunities is going to be important to us. I think it's also important that we find a way to drive innovation with our digital and IT. We've got a lot of accelerators and hubs in West London. And so, we really believe that the future of growth in part comes from recognizing that West London is per se the screen capital, if you will. The preponderance of film studios from Shepperton to West London to Ealing to Eastleigh are all in West London. We've got the ITV, Sky, all the major broadcasters. So I think, as a region, it gives us a good starting point to really push the creative industries as a solution in terms of the recovery, as well as working with those kind of visionaries like Olympia that can bring that physical reality to it.
Thanks very much, Bill. I think we're all extremely keen to get more television, film and video made in the near future. So we've got to watch fewer reruns. And if they could be done in West London, I'd be even happier.
In a weird sort of way, that's what the COVID has shown, that everybody needs more content. And so everything from the content to the production to the post-production to the broadcasting are all areas that we've just got to figure out how to sort of tap into those sort of strengths.
Yeah, good content's always good content, isn't it? And we all need it. Handing over to Oliver. How about theatre, which is clearly another key element in us getting our creative lives back on track and having a little more interest and content in the world?
Yes, certainly. I thought I'd just do a little introduction. Troubadour Theatre is who I'm from, where I'm from. We specialise in creating state-of-the-art entertainment venues in London and throughout the world. And our venues become go-to destinations that are fully flexible, sustainable, and contemporary and renowned. And we showcase extraordinary world-class audience experiences which cover the entire spectrum of the entertainment and events industry, and primarily in areas that are undergoing urban regeneration. So that's quite important, and that's obviously very important from our conversation today. In West London, we've got the Wembley Park Theatre, which is housed in the old Fountain Studios, and where we work very closely with Brent Council, and up until recently at White City Theatre in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is a long story, but we're in a process of relocating within the borough. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of the disease on our industry, what will be the key to the recovery, hopefully, and what are the benefits of being in West London. And what I would say is, I think historically, theatre has been pretty resilient in times of economic downturn and hardship. In fact, the last financial crash saw an increase in box office income of 20% year on year. But this pandemic, certainly the nature of it is obviously very, very different, and it has been absolutely catastrophic for our industry. I think without doubt, theatre is one of the hardest hit industries of all. Over the last 3 months during the shutdown, we've lost an income of over 330 million to our sector. And as of now, we're staring at a closure lasting 6-9 months, potentially a year or even more. So, since the closure of all our theatres from mid-March, theatre companies have had virtually no income at all. And I think this is the fundamental difference, because the business of commercial and subsidised theatres is built on box office revenue. Everything else is extra. We've no means of earning any money. The theatres can't offer takeaways, unfortunately, or shift businesses online, despite, obviously the welcome that some of the streaming of shows have been recently. 90% of employees in our industry have been furloughed on the government's scheme, the job furlough scheme, which has been a lifeline until now. However, for the 70% of the theatre workforce that's self-employed, the situation is pretty dire. Some have no access to the government support. Others have managed to receive money from the self-employed income support scheme, but as that stands, it only covers 3 months' pay. Not even the most optimistic, I think that this will be close to covering the length of the time that theatres will remain closed, and the huge numbers of freelancers that are missing out entirely on this is pretty terrifying. I think the big thing is that a recent SALT survey, the Society of London Theatre survey, included that 70% of theatres throughout the UK will run out of cash by Christmas, which is pretty catastrophic, and quite a few will run out of cash before the end of the summer. In fact, some unfortunately have already become insolvent. So it's hard, and it's hard not to state the importance of things like the Christmas pantomime and the Christmas period, which some theatres rely on entirely for their annual revenue. So I think the importance of stressing this is that it is a dire situation that we find ourselves in, and in terms of the step back is quite shocking, because the very nature of the disease, and under the government's rebuild scheme, it looks like theatres and performance spaces will be likely to be one of the last sectors to reopen. I think what we know, and I think the positive bit is that, from history, it will tell, history has told us that we will come back and it will bounce back with a vengeance. And I think, like you state, theatre and storytelling, we will all be desperate for escapism, arguably even greater than before. And I think history tells us that, storytelling, entertainment, shared experience, they're fundamental to our way of life, and they're built into our DNA. The biggest problem, obviously, is that social distancing is not compatible with our sector. Just it doesn't stack up. We've all modelled it, but it would mean selling 1 seat in 6, and most theatres rely on about 60% of the seats to survive. So I think it's just not plausible. Plus the practicalities of how you social distance actors on stage and backstage and keep them 2 meters from one another, which then leads on to an insurance and liability point of view, because something which is vital in terms of how we move forward. It'll be one of the key barriers preventing theatres from reopening prior to a vaccine being found. And then Michael Grade, you may have seen, wrote in the Times the other day that the insurance industry in the UK has been terrible within our sector, and have again managed to wiggle out of paying out anything. But the big question is even if a production and venue could reopen, could they even get insurance in the market to cover them? Because a producer will need assurance that if the production gets shut down for 2 weeks because someone in the cast gets ill, everyone has to isolate, and would they be covered from that? Plus, obviously, there's the liability around people who welcome audiences into buildings. So I think there is a real push in our sector. We are going to need some form of financial aid. Otherwise, I think we are looking at thousands of theatres collapsing, shutting down, not to mention the tens of thousands of jobs that we lost. So, I know that every sector of the economy is arguing for something that and they're all completely legitimate and significant, as most sectors have lower income than they're used to, but our sector has none. And I think that's the fundamental difference. I think that makes a unique situation. At the end of the day, any business can only survive if they have cash, and the cash either has to come from someone giving you a grant, loaning you some money, or being able to trade again. And I think that's the key. We need to find ways to be able to open the doors and get back up and running.
I agree. I think it would be lovely to have some live theatre back in our lives. I'm hoping that when we all come out of this, we will value the live experience even more. I'm aware that webinars are very well, and it's lovely to meet one of my friends on Zoom, and it's even lovely to watch a movie, but it's never the same as that live performance. So hopefully there will be a pent-up demand at some point, as soon as we are allowed to go and sit near enough somebody to watch live theatre again.
Exactly. I think that is key. That is key to it. And we are working ways through it, but I think it's going to be a long road. I think what is vital, and as Lloyd mentioned, is when we do get back up and running, and apart from government aid and the rest of it, it's about finding good and meaningful partnerships with local businesses. And as speaking from experience, it's vital that we find the right partners, because we all need to help each other out in this. And I think it's important that the larger businesses, especially developers who are trying to make a real change and difference in communities and areas, that they realise this even more so. And Quintain are great partners of ours in Wembley, have been really good at that, and Yoo Capital certainly seem to be coming from the right angle. So I think it's very important that it's not just a PR stunt. It's very important that actually the roots are formed because the theatre sector and the entertainment sector can really, really help communities. In West London, I think we've proven this, we've shown this, and certainly working with Borough of Brent and with Hammersmith and Fulham, and even for the short period that we were operating, we brought in a huge amount of footfall, which helps. Again, it passes on to the retail, to the businesses. The theatre industry adds 2 billion to the capital sector in terms of tourism, and 5 billion as a sector to the UK economy, which is pretty impressive. And I think what's another interesting stat is that UK theatres have an annual audience of 34 million people, which is twice that of the Premiership. So I think it's really important. And I think the landscape has been changing for us. Moving further out is what we're all about as a business. I think over the last 5 years, more people have been moved further out due to the affordability. And I think arguably even more so with COVID, people will go not necessarily want to travel into the West End. And guess what? Most people don't live in the West End. And I think we can really help build communities and work with local businesses, work with local schools. There's a huge number of job opportunities that come with a theatre. I'm going to move us on, Oliver, because I've started to get questions coming in, and I'm really aware that I've got lots of lovely questions to ask. You've made a really good point, which I would just like to kick off by actually putting around to some of the panel, which is that value of partnership working, and indeed almost co-working, where a lot of creativity comes out of the partnership, the innovation that you get when you are in a co-working space, or when you are bumping into somebody and those ideas get flowing. Clearly, in a socially distanced world, that's going to be a lot harder. And I wondered if any of our panel had views on how we can continue to encourage that level of innovative interaction if we don't have as many co-working and/or spaces for that to happen in. I'm going to look at Andrew first of all, because I'm aware he's already had to look somehow at how offices and spaces can be changed. And I think that space is an important element to that, because you don't quite get the same idea flow if you're in a virtual world.
Yeah, I think it's providing safe spaces to meet, and in terms of meeting up with people in the workplace. I think certainly looking from the office environment, but also it can be applied to the cultural side, is that I think there'll be a change in the landscape in terms of people working from home, but they will want to actually interact like we do at Olympia in terms of shows and meeting. And it's just how perhaps technology helps with that, but also physical environment in terms of safe places to meet, wider access points. Spaces will just get bigger in terms of the allowances that we've got to have. So there is this counterintuitive where people say, office space will be reduced, but like everything else, it may have to be increased because social distancing will require lower density population.
Thanks very much. Would anyone else like to come in on that one before we start moving on to the questions? Okay, so I've got some questions from the audience which I'm going to read out in order. I've got actually one specifically for Lloyd here. I've got the area architecture is progressing a development of its flexible housing model on a site very close to Olympia. How could this project be dovetailed to meet the demand generated by the various stages of the Olympia rollout?
I think the answer to that question is we'd love to see you and sit down with you and talk about it some more to understand what exactly you have in mind. I think it's fair to say that as Olympia, given the scale of what we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years, we have engaged in a lot of discussions with our neighbors. And in some instances elsewhere in London where we've had large investments, we've ended up actually expanding kind of the overall plan to include some of our neighbors via a form of collaboration. So I think to the extent that there is such a synergy, as you're suggesting, we'd love to have a discussion with you about it and learn a little bit more.
So that question came from Andre Fagan. I can either ask you online to say a little bit more, or you can pick this up perhaps in the Zoom chat later. If you want to come online, you need to give me a little wave and I can bring you in later. Moving on, I've got the High Streets panel earlier today did actually talk about the importance of non-retail elements in animating future high streets. Now, this is something that Shama actually mentioned as part of Brent's ambitions, so that you have a reason to go somewhere, not just to shop, and to go there rather than to just work online. So what can you do to get creative industries to reach out more generally to involve themselves in town centres? And I love this question. How could, for example, Disney help Hammersmith Town Centre? So Shama, if you just want to think about Disney for the moment, no, and how staging something in the high street, or how we can use our creative industries to bring additional life to those town centres, which are genuinely going to need a bit of a boost going forward.
Yeah, I think there are probably two sort of elements to this, really. I think there's a policy framework that needs to be in place from local government to look at how planning can allow redesignation of particular retail sectors within the high street. Some of the stuff that we're doing in Brent is, for example, Wilson High Road. If any of you know Wilson High Road, it's a very long high street, and actually looking at the quality of what's on offer there and how do we repurpose it. I know there's been some permitted development conversations about making, retail through PD to make it residential. Well, my view would be actually, rather than making it residential, how else can we repurpose it? So some of the work we're getting on within Brent is what do we need our high streets to be? And the creative sector can really play a massive role in that. And I think it's also if creative sectors want a role, not being afraid to come and have conversations with us at local government, because we've got the levers to make the changes, to make it happen. We're very open to those conversations and animating workspace. So using the levers that we have within councils to, say, close off roads or highways to kind of animate a space to make it about the creative space. Is there an element of using open markets and market traders to kind of showcase smaller creative roles? And that's the kind of thing that we're working on at the moment in Brent. And it's looking at what else we can do, because I think we're very conscious that post-COVID, mental health is going to be a real challenge. And actually I think the creative sector and the cultural sector have a real role to play in combating not just mental health but social isolation, and actually how we can work together on those public health issues as well as the high street issue.
Thanks very much. Anyone else like to come in? Louise, I wondered if you had any views on this, because clearly having vibrant high streets is a value when we try to promote ourselves externally.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So London and Partners, and I'm just trying to remember how much of this is in the public domain. So this is why I'm sort of, this is my thinking face. But we are, because as the tourism office, there is going to be, this is in a way what we're going through is resilience, but I think what we're also all talking about is recovery. And for us, part of recovery is people being confident and going outside. So it's about, Oliver being able to be confident that he can open his theatre. It's about people being confident they can go into their high street. So we are working with some of the major institutions in London about that messaging, about how we speak to a London audience and how we speak to a Southeast audience and how we speak to an English audience and how we speak to a UK audience, because that's the first audience that we need to get more active in the street, and sort of make people feel, as lockdown is easing, people are still concerned. And so it's balancing how we promote London being open, but being open safely. And so the messaging around that is really important, and it's really, we're working with lots of other people to make sure that it is appropriate.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask you one little thing before I come on to Bill, because I actually just have a subsequent question which says that a lot of the creative industries are challenging, and a number of ad agencies are struggling. And is there anything that you can do to make sure that before the ad agencies lose all their talented staff, you can use them to promote London more?
Well, interestingly enough, an ad agency is doing pro bono work for us on that particular project that I was talking about. So it's been one of the really sort of amazing ad agencies. And it's not that we have asked for them to do that. They want to do that with us. But it's interesting. So we work really closely with the Advertising Association. And, obviously Cannes Lions is virtual this year. It's called Cannes Lives. There is a lot of content that is online for the advertising industry in particular, because it has seen a significant downturn. But interestingly enough, I think, as you were saying earlier, content is still actually being generated and hasn't seen a downturn. So there's a balance between those two things, in that advertising has changed. And I think, all of us will have been consuming content and have seen advertising that feels tone deaf. But we've also seen advertising that feels really spot on. And I think it's been interesting to see what brands have really responded fast and have changed their messaging. And I think that sort of thought in how you are communicating is something that the advertising sector is probably also grappling with.
I think that's true. I think looking what brand London will be once we've settled will be interesting, because I think we will be talking about ourselves in a very different way. Bill, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just very briefly in terms of the question of what could, quote unquote, I think it was what could Disney do to help the high street? And I would argue it's a bigger question of what could the multimedia brands, shall we say, do more. And I would say it would start with engagement. They've got wide tails of supply chain and branding and expertise in everything from theater for Oliver to development for Olympia to everything else. So if there were a way to use our collective weight as West London to kind of put something that would allow more open engagement, I think that would get further. But yeah, the expertise from animating to opening to support could be wide found, but I'd hate to see it be limited to Disney, and I don't think that's a suggestion, but I think it needs to be a wider engagement on how that would happen.
Well, that's an interesting link to our next question, which somebody has asked. If you could have one more creative industry business to bring to West London, what would it be? Everyone's going to go quiet. Louise, you come in.
No,
who would you choose?
Yeah, I can definitely think. Well,
out there to get to London, more jobs, more creativity.
Well, I mean, you know, there are. I mean, Bill and I have had discussions about this. Anyway, there are a significant number of companies saying that they want more studios. You know, as people are developing more content, you know, whether it's Netflix saying they're looking to develop more content, or whether it's Apple saying they want to develop content, there are actually content providers who are not yet in London. So I'm thinking of Hulu, for example. But there are also broadcast platforms that aren't in London that I would really like to see in London, like Caffeine, which is a bit like Twitch. So there's a lot of North American West Coast companies that my colleagues in North America are speaking to. So, you know, I've just given you two of the examples, but, you know, this is not, and what's interesting is companies are still setting up in London. You know, obviously it's not the same level of incoming as it has been, but we have seen companies approach us, you know, like even last week saying, I'm looking to set up a company in London. So, you know, and whether it's in India or in China where the visa offices are closed, it's slightly more difficult, or whether they're from Germany or from France. So it's been it has taken us slightly by surprise, if I'm honest.
That's good, but, you know, surprises and good surprises are always very pleasant.
Yeah, very good surprise.
Would anyone else like to come in and say what's their choice of a creative giant to make a big difference? Shama?
I suppose my answer to that question wouldn't be necessarily a creative giant or a completely new industry. I think there's an opportunity here in West London to reconnect to hard to reach communities who don't necessarily always connect with creative industries in the cultural sector. So for example, the Kiln Theatre in Brent, formerly known as Tricycle, did a great outreach work with some of our most hard to reach young people. And actually I think there's an opportunity for the creative sectors generally to connect to communities where art and culture and creative life has not been something that's part of their everyday norm. So I think there's an opportunity, rather than anything new, build on what you've already got here, because there is a lot of strength and a lot of unknown, and see what else we can tap into. I think that would be my view for the creative sector, is saying actually what strengths do the boroughs of West London have, and how do you connect to the people within these communities who are already here, who've got a rich history of culture and stuff, and how do we bring that forward?
It follows on to quite a nice question, which I'm going to keep moving with, which is what measures are you all aware of to get the creative industries to work more with the tech sector? Both are strong in West London, and perhaps between them, they could work ways around the restrictions of social distancing. So is there a way that tech and creative, I know they already work together in a number of ways, just anything you think of the games industry or film industry tends to have both involved. But what sort of infrastructure could help develop that even further if we're looking at it as a way of boosting the economy? And that infrastructure, I guess, also relates to a question we've had, is our internet up to it if we're going to be using more technical solutions to communication going forward? So there was quite a little bit in there, but would anybody like to come in on that one? Everyone has gone suspiciously quiet.
I
I'm going to look at Oliver because you've not been in for a while. And so what technology or infrastructure can we think about?
I'm not 100% sure about infrastructure, but I do think there's an exciting, interesting angle from culture meeting tech. And we're certainly we're sort of quite far in conversations with the likes of Imperial and Scale Space in West London with regards to how might that look. And yes, as you say, there's lots of technology used in film. There's lots of technology used in theatre these days, and also in gaming. And the gaming sector is a growing market, especially in, you know, globally. It's not massive here yet in the UK, but there's lots of companies looking to come in. So I think there could be something exciting on that front. And I think, yeah, I mean, this world we're about to approach and go into, maybe there is in terms of technology and certainly in terms of the confidence Louise was talking about in terms of people coming back to environments where they can sit and watch entertainment. There are trials and things going on. Even the Palladium, Lloyd Webber was mentioning yesterday, in terms of different types of technology we might be trying to use to see to protect people, to help people, you know, and to give confidence coming into a venue. So I think there's all sorts of different angles. I think there's a good. It's an interesting space to be in because it's something that two worlds do connect, but historically haven't really. And I think going forward, I think there's lots of advantages to try and find ways of getting people together in socially distanced, of course, but in creating a sort of a tech culture hub.
I think that would be lovely. I shall look forward to the day I can enjoy Richard III with immersive technology. Bill, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, that was a good point. I just wanted to add that in talking to some of the media companies like the BBC and others, what they've pointed out is that it's a great opportunity, but in terms of education, is a real challenge because there are quote unquote creative industry degrees and technology, digital degrees. And the idea is that at some point we've got to marry the whole creativity and technology much earlier, since we need someone to kind of come from that single camp as opposed to always coming from both camps. So I think there's a great future, and it's yet to be cracked on how you can truly have that true integration. But as Oliver sort of said, I think it's all to play for in terms of the future.
Thanks very much. I know that I've got a question here specifically for Lloyd from the EA about the EAR architecture, and we're going to run out of time. And I know that the pair of you would like to talk together. So, and I can't quite manage to get the speaker in because every time I go to him, the text seems to let me down. So what I'm going to say is hopefully that he will give his contact details and we'll get you back on. No, he's here. Do you want to come in now? If you unmute yourself, it says you're Andre Fagan, but I think that's a lie. I think you're somebody else with his email address. Are you coming in to join us? Hello? No, that's not worked. We'll try to get that conversation going outside this arena. I've probably got time to put one more question before we move on. I'm just looking up here. So I'm looking in the wrong list. That helps. So this one is specifically for Shama, but I'd actually like to open it up to everybody. You made a really good point earlier about legacy, and some of the good legacies that people have been looking for out of COVID have covered the fact that we might be more inclusive about our employment, which is clearly going to give a challenge going forward, and that we might also be able to use some of this to address the issues about climate change. So I've got a specific question that says, what can you do to help get young people more involved, both in creativity and hopefully in employment? And then I'm going to open those questions to the whole of the panel to see if you've got any ideas about how we can use what we've experienced to positively influence our future in terms of inclusive employment and climate change. Shama, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is one of the key things about one of the drivers for our Borough of Culture legacy ambitions, really. And I think one of the things that we do within Regeneration, and we're starting to do a lot more, is that part of any regeneration scheme is actually having a young people's board and using ways to get their voices heard in decision making of the changing nature of their environment. So looking at the creative sector is how can creative businesses who may want to have a space within the regeneration scheme, what can they offer to young people to get involved and open their doors up to young people? so for us, it's about getting young people's voices in decision making, and I think that's where we're finding where young people feel that they've been excluded from conversations. So they're seeing a lot of change. If you look at Wembley Park, for example, it's over £1 billion worth of investment, and yet they feel they've been excluded from all the decisions that are going to impacting them and opportunities that come forward. So looking at how developers, businesses can actually really engage and speak to local authorities, because we have connections to youth parliaments, to schools, about how you can make that connection and really embed yourself in the community. And there are things like the Neighbourhood SIL programme that we've got in Brent, and most councils will as well. So as a way of connecting funds to projects that people want to get involved with as well. And we've seen it become a real positive angle. George the poet is based in Brent. He's from Brent and one of our estates in Stonebridge, and he's been involved in producing YouTube videos to connect to young people. And actually we had an event with young people about regeneration of their estate, and they were performing, and it helped them feel connected to the changes that are going to come about on their estate. So I think there's an element of how we collectively work together on this, and then there are levers that councils can use and creative industries can use as well to do that.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to bring Lloyd in on this one because I think this was an important area where Olympia can play a role, but I seem to have temporarily lost him. I'm assuming his internet connection is struggling. Is there anyone else who would like to come in to talk about how we can be more inclusive about our employment and indeed perhaps address climate change with some of the ways we reconfigure the way we work going forward? Give me a wave. Bill, come in on this one.
Okay.
Can we be slightly better about how we get more people involved? Because young people in particular are going to struggle with job opportunities because there are some sectors that aren't going to come.
I think two things. One, just for given the time to be short, I think one is letting them know about the opportunities in the creative industries. I think there's a disconnect between everything we're trying to do and still the idea of a young person in secondary school talking to a guidance counselor and not being told about this sort of stuff. And I think secondly, it's making people aware that 50% of the creative industry supply chain is in the non-creative industry. So, with all due respect to Olympia, if there's a young person out there interested in carpentry, he could equally go work for Oliver in terms of doing carpentry just as well as go work for Yoo Capital. So I think it's about letting young people know about the opportunities. Happy to have a much longer conversation about that at any point in time.
We do have lots of questions coming in, but I'm aware that we are about to run out of time. What we will do is we will send the questions around, and if we can get some responses, we will put them out to our audience going forwards and after this, because it's been a very lively conversation. I'd like to thank you all very much for participating. I'm going to hand us back to Bonnie now, as I've only got 2 minutes left before our time runs out, to close us down and to look forward to a resurgence in some nice creativity going forward, so I can go to the theatre and I can go and see a show and I can go and communicate with somebody in a more normal way in a few months' time. And everybody here will be doing their absolute utmost, I expect, to ensure that we can do that. Bonnie, over to you.
Thanks, Jo, and thank you to all our panel for taking part, and thank you to Capital West London and Yoo Capital for bringing us this panel, and thank you to you all for watching. I think it was a really important conversation to be having at this time. One of our panellists this morning in The Future of the High Street attributed a quote to Jeff Bezos saying that it's not about looking at what's going to change in the next 20 years, but about what's going to stay the same when you're planning your business model. And I think creativity and engaging in the creative sector is something that we all enjoy and that isn't going to change. So important to be discussing this sector at the moment. So if you're staying with us, our next session with Real Estate Live is about Gumb communities and the potential that they have for delivering sustainable development and new places in the future. That will be starting in the next half an hour or so. And we have some more West London sessions coming up this week too. So if you're interested in the development of the sub-region, West London Business are running a webinar tomorrow. So have a look on the Real Estate Live website for that. And if this is you leaving us for the day, then thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in another session soon. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.